actuel, je veux dire, mais sur tout ce que cette charge de travail non rémunérée qui repose sur les femmes cause en elles, y compris sur la santé. Voilà, sur leur santé. Et ce manque de temps-là, ce que ça fait.
En retard, pour que l'enfant ne reste pas sur le trottoir sans garde. Et c'est pour cela d'ailleurs, donc cette charge mentale a un impact sur le travail rémunéré. Et c'est pour ça que dans certains pays scandinaves, par exemple, des réglementations intérieures aux entreprises ont interdit l'organisation de réunions l'après-midi. Parce que c'est dans les réunions que les décisions peuvent se prendre et la femme qui doit absolument partir à 17h ou 18h pour aller chercher ses enfants à l'école, eh bien, elle n'assistera pas à la réunion ou elle partira avant la fin de la réunion. Et donc, ça aura un impact sur sa carrière parce qu'elle n'aura pas été présente au moment où se prennent des décisions importantes et parce que pour tous les autres participants à la réunion, c'est quelqu'un sur qui on ne peut pas compter parce qu'elle s'absente au moment où on a besoin de son avis. Donc, vous voyez qu'il y a ça a un impact sur... Et alors oui, sur la pauvreté en temps, il y a des recherches qui sont faites et vous pouvez vous référer par exemple aux travaux du Levy Institute aux États-Unis qui a travaillé beaucoup sur ces questions. Il y a toute une littérature.
Merci Isabella. Ensuite, Chima. Ok. Donc, Chima, Sheima, Chirabu. Chi. Ok. Chima, Sheima, Chirabu. Et trois chi. Oh, but she said chi. So you know better than her, right? Okay. Chi.
You know, there is a way we demonize unpaid work that might not actually be the right thing. Unpaid work also helps in building savings. I have this my farmland. You know, I could have employed somebody to do it, but I do it myself. Instead of going into leisure, I am building my savings. I play piano very well and guitar. And then my daughter wants to learn it. I could have sent her to school to do, but I know I'm going to do a much better work than that teacher. Instead of paying that $500 or whatever, I do it. I work with her on that. I'm building savings. It's unpaid work, but I'm building my savings as well. So there's a way we demonize this thing because of the way we think about it. And there are so many examples. Like I have lots of comments, but I will just stop on those two to give others a chance to talk.
Alors, merci beaucoup, professeur, pour cette présentation qui est vraiment très riche d'informations. Ma question ou bien ma remarque, c'est que les questions sur l'utilisation du temps sont collectées via notamment des enquêtes spécifiques comme l'enquête budget-temps, bien l'enquête sur l'emploi du temps. Alors qu'il n'y a aucune question, à ma connaissance, sur ce type de questions dans les EDS, les enquêtes EDS, qui portent sur la santé familiale. Alors personnellement, durant ma thèse de doctorat, j'ai voulu mesurer un indice composite de l'empowerment des femmes. Et dans la revue de littérature, il y a en fait que le partage des tâches ménagères, c'est l'une des dimensions très importantes de l'empowerment des femmes. Mais malheureusement, j'étais obligée de sacrifier cette dimension puisqu'il n'y a aucune question posée dans les enquêtes EDS sur l'utilisation du temps. Et j'ajoute par ailleurs qu'il y a en fait un article qui m'a vraiment marqué, publié en 2015 sur la révolution de genre. En fait, il est en anglais, où les auteurs ont mentionné que la révolution de genre se fait à travers ou bien via deux phases. La première, c'est lorsque la femme rejoigne l'homme dans le marché du travail et que cette phase aura un impact négatif sur la fécondité. La deuxième phase, qui émerge lentement, est lorsque les hommes rejoignent les femmes dans la sphère domestique et que cette fois-ci, cela aura un impact positif sur la fécondité, donc comme s'il y aura une reprise de la fécondité. Alors, je me suis dit pourquoi on ne pense pas à intégrer une ou bien deux questions sur l'utilisation du temps dans les enquêtes, dans d'autres types d'enquêtes, pour voir l'impact de cela sur d'autres aspects démographiques. Voilà, merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor, for the presentation. I'll just give my thoughts and then some of the observations I've made during your presentation. I knew about the findings for time use data for Uganda, but as a Ugandan and as a Ugandan woman, I'm not certain that time use data is a true reflection of what actually happens in the country in regards to the redistribution of work, paid work and unpaid care work among men and women. When you showed the data in comparison to other countries, even African countries, Uganda ranked much better than the other countries. And considering that our social norms and gender norms are not very different in sub-Saharan Africa, there is a big discrepancy. Well, I may not go into the politics of the data, but just to say that I'm not sure it is the true reflection of what is actually happening in the country. Looking at the 5 R's and reflecting on our African society, our social norms, the gender norms and roles, recognizing, reducing, redistributing unpaid care work, I would think that if we focus and advocate for recognizing unpaid care work, it would sort of give us more mileage other than focusing so much on reducing or redistributing because of our social norms that traditionally the woman has been bearing this kind of work. And even among the literate population or the elites, it is not any different in our homes. As a woman, even though someone gets a PhD, they will still have to do these roles in their families. But if we advocate for recognizing this work, and maybe we advocate that let there be a monetary value attached to this work, then that may give us more mileage other than focusing on changing the social norms, because that will take us a lot of time, decades. My other observation is that in Kenya right now, there is a Kenyan colleague can give us more information. They are working on a care work policy So if other African countries can also borrow from that, I mean, it would be good to benchmark. The policy has not yet been fully developed or passed, but at least there is a step that is being taken towards that direction. The other is to kindly share with us your reference for 2022. I've had a chance to read your 2019 report, but you referenced one of 2022. I think that is the latest. If you could just share with us the title, it would be good for us to, those of us who have not yet read it, to be able to get a chance to do so. Thank you. Yeah.
Oui, donc la publication est en open source. Donc vous pouvez la télécharger, je vous donnerai le numéro du DOI. De toute façon, il y aura une distribution des présentations, non?
Oui.
Oui, d'accord. Alors j'essaye de me souvenir des questions. Oui, à l'intérieur du travail non rémunéré, il y a une distribution des rôles entre les hommes et les femmes. C'est-à-dire que, par exemple, l'homme va jouer avec les enfants, ou lui apprendre à jouer de la guitare, mais ce n'est pas l'homme qui va changer les couches ou laver le bébé. De la même façon, dans la préparation des repas, par exemple, l'homme peut mettre la table, mais ce n'est pas lui qui va préparer le repas. Donc ce ne sont pas exactement les mêmes tâches, et les enquêtes emploi du temps permettent de rentrer dans les détails de toutes ces activités détaillées et voir qu'à l'intérieur de ces diverses tâches domestiques, il y a également une répartition qui se fait entre les hommes et les femmes. Pour ce qui concerne le chiffre de l'Ouganda, tous les chiffres que je vous ai présentés s'appuient sur les rapports officiels. Je n'ai pas utilisé les microdonnées, parce que souvent elles ne sont pas disponibles, et par ailleurs, on ne pourrait pas les utiliser sur un aussi grand nombre de pays de façon comparative. Donc je regarderai d'un peu plus près les données de l'Ouganda pour vous dire ce que j'en pense plus précisément. Pour ce qui concerne, je ne sais pas si j'ai oublié une question, parce que comme ça en fait beaucoup. Bon, on verra plus tard. Donc pour notre collègue marocaine, vous avez posé la question, pourquoi dans les enquêtes démographiques et sanitaires, il n'y a pas de question sur le partage des tâches ménagères entre les hommes et les femmes. Alors, je pense que des questions d'opinion de ce type seraient sans doute bienvenues. Mais j'attire votre attention sur le fait que lorsqu'on veut entrer dans des questions plus quantitatives sur l'emploi du temps, à travers des questions d'enquête déjà lourdes et d'enquête sur les conditions de vie des ménages, par exemple, c'est pour ça que je n'ai pas retenu ces enquêtes dans la compilation. Parce que la question qui est posée, c'est au cours de la semaine précédente, combien de temps avez-vous consacré aux tâches ménagères? La réponse risque d'être très approximative. C'est par exemple le cas des... je n'ai pas cité l'Égypte, par exemple. Il y a des données sur l'Égypte dans l'enquête de panel sur le marché du travail. Mais ce sont des questions de ce type. Combien de temps avez-vous consacré aux tâches domestiques au cours de la semaine qui précède? Donc ce sont des réponses qui sont incertaines. Et on voit d'ailleurs qu'il y a de très fortes différences avec les véritables enquêtes emploi du temps. Effectivement, je crois qu'il faudrait concevoir une série de questions qualitatives pour essayer de mesurer le partage des tâches entre les hommes et les femmes dans des enquêtes du type EDS ou conditions de vie, qui pourraient compléter utilement les enquêtes emploi du temps elles-mêmes qui ne peuvent pas être renouvelées avec une fréquence aussi grande que les autres enquêtes. Donc je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à toutes les questions, mais on pourra en discuter à la pause.
Oui, je pense l'heure de la pause est même terminée. La prochaine session est censée commencer en fait dans 2 minutes. Étant donné que nous avons des personnes qui nous attendent sur le Zoom, je vous propose donc que nous prenions 5 minutes pour nous détendre les jambes, prendre les cafés et puis rejoindre la salle pour qu'on puisse entamer la prochaine séance. Voilà, c'est parce que le débat était passionnant, hein, la présentation était passionnante, donc ça nous a pris tout ce temps-là. Encore merci, et je pense qu'on va suivre ce que Jeanne nous a appris, n'est-ce pas? On va dire merci au professeur avec... faut sourire. Oui, c'est ça, hein, il n'a même pas...
policies to be able to track and evaluate the policymakers and governments in terms of holding them accountable. The data that we are going to generate out of this able to integrate some good policy recommendations to ensure that we have the work around the care to be a main area of focus. And again, also the State Department for Gender also has been able to, given that they are the gender machinery within the country, they are also going to continue promoting building of capacity, both at the national and county level, and as well as also to include also the non-state actors. And so they are going to steer the process, given that they are the main coordinators of this process of coming up with the national care policy, all the way to the end, of course, with the guidance of the UN, women, and other key stakeholders within the sector. Then for the University of Nairobi, we've again had an arrangement with the University of Nairobi to be able to use the timely survey data to carry out qualitative analysis to be able to develop policy recommendations, which will be able to help us to identify what are the main drivers of unpaid domestic and care work. So again, like I've already mentioned, UN Women continues to provide the lead technical support as well as financial support. And I would like to mention that for the milestones that we've been able to achieve, this discussion began way back in 2021, and we already have a roadmap that we had developed to guide the process, out of which the State Department already has got 2 consultants who have been able to carry out a national care needs assessment, and this report is scheduled to be launched in the next month, where we shall be having out of it a national care policy roadmap. Sorry for that. So once we launch the preliminary report, then out of it, we shall be coming up with a national care policy roadmap that again will guide the process of now developing the national care policy. And so all through that entire period, we are going to continue seeking support from UN Women and other key stakeholders who have been convened together within a technical working group that we have, and as well as a national steering committee. So we look forward to have the process of developing the national care policy concluded, that is within the financial year 2022-23, that is from June of 22 to July of 2022 to June of 2023, and then subsequently, after the government has approved of this policy, we shall also be having an implementation plan, which will now guide its mainstreaming both at the national and county level. Next. So a few of the steps that we are going to undertake as I conclude is that we'll be having technical working group meetings to be able to track on the progress that we are making and also continue giving input. We shall also have consultative forums with the county stakeholders. You may appreciate that Kenya now has got 2 devolved systems of government. So it's important that we are able to include also the county governments. Then again, we shall also be conducting validation meetings, as well as also sensitizing the legislators. You realize Kenya has just done their elections, and so this will be a good opportunity for us to ensure that we are able to sensitize them on the same. Afterwards, then the cabinet will have to approve for the policy before it is published, and then the dissemination will continue as we use the implementation stakeholders within the national statistics. Thank you. Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Kanabal. That was faster than I thought it would be. Great that you kept to time. We have time for 2 questions. I think what's important here is that they are actually using time use data to influence policy, gender policy in the country. And Kanabal explained that process. Professor Charms is one of the consultants involved in the process. So, any questions to Kanabal? Is Uganda going to replicate this process, do you think? And what will be needed for Uganda to actually replicate this, given that you already have time use survey data?
Thank you so much, Isabella. So in Uganda currently, it is mainly the CSOs. We have a Women Economic Empowerment National Hub. So on that National Hub of Women Economic Empowerment, the CSOs, including ICRW that I work with, we are advocating for the recognition of unpaid care work, and we are trying to benchmark from our Kenyan neighbors, seeing that they are making progressive steps towards the right direction, that we would wish our policymakers to sort of take the same direction. But currently we are, there is an organization that has worked with UNET. It's a Uganda network for women organizations. They have contributed to the care work, how do they call it? Scorecard. So that is one step we have so far in Uganda, to know that we have a scorecard that we can reference to. So it is just advocacy that is currently ongoing, but we are trying to engage the Ministry of Gender to make sure that they come on board and buy into the idea of us having a care work policy in the country. So advocacy efforts, lobbying, that is what is currently ongoing in Uganda. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's great that we can now begin to use your neighbor's example in your advocacy efforts. And so good luck with that. Yes, we have one question.
I noticed that one of the outcomes of this exercise is to develop a national policy document on domestic and pet work and care work. Maybe I don't name it as properly, but it is the ultimate outcome. My question is this a command coming from the government, or it is a document that CSO are preparing, and after they lobby the government to adopt this document?
That's an excellent question. Kannabel, please respond to the question. Okay, so I think in the interest of time I'll respond because I happen to be here and be involved. The process, even though it's funded and supported by not just UN Women but by Oxfam as well, I think Oxfam does the scorecard, the process is being driven from the Ministry of Gender. And the State Department of, they call it here the State Department of Gender. And because it's linked with the planning process in government, it's part of all those processes, and even though other people provide technical support and financial support, it's firmly in the hands of government. And it corresponds with government timelines. And we recently had a training for county level officials, more than 300 were trained on the care economy, the importance of measuring time use, and how do we take that and convert it into policy. And so we are hoping that through that process there's more ownership and that it will be used even at the lowest level of administration in Kenya. Let's quickly move forward to the next presentation, and I think, you know, if there's still time at the end we can ask more questions. So the second presentation, do you need this one? The second presentation actually summarizes a recent analysis we did in the region on youth not in employment, education and training. And as you know, this is a very important indicator under Goal 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals. What is of interest of this, with this analysis is really that previously most countries used the old definition of employment, and yesterday we had a conversation about that, to calculate the youth not in employment, education and training. The consultant who did this work actually used the data of countries but then recalculated it using the 2013 definition. And what we found, it was really that as a result of that, the need rates increased significantly. And the study tried to identify what are the determinants of youth not in employment, education and training. And it's a problem across our region. So, excuse me, the study was done in East and Southern Africa, and all the countries colored in blue were included in the study because we had data that not only gave labor and education outcomes, but also other information such as child marriage, etc., age at first marriage. So we could look at all the determining factors. So specifically, excuse me, this addresses target 8.6 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the aim is to substantially reduce the proportion of youth. So we find that personal obstacles and other demands on time, and here is a direct link with the time use surveys. So many youth cannot enter the employment sector or the education sector because of demands on their time. Especially young women sometimes have to take care of the other siblings in the family. And then, of course, we know that the availability of jobs, the ability of our economies to absorb the labor that's available is very limited. So according to the 19th ICL definition of employment, people are considered employed if they are earning a wage or salary, they work or help in a family business, they are busy with family farming or production, which is for sale. And here we include even the person who's a graduate who sells tomatoes, and that's your concern. But they are not employed if they do family farming or production for own farmal use, and also when they're voluntary workers or an unpaid apprentice. So when we do the calculations using this 2013 definition, you'll see in this graph how significant the increase is of youth classified as not in employment, education, and training. And you'll see that women in general are more likely to be in this position than young men. So the darker blue on the far left gives the statistics for women. The next bar is for men using the new definition. And then, of course, the turquoise and the gray is for the old definition. And you'll see in all countries there's a significant change in the percentage of youth that are classified as NEET. Exception is Namibia, where for men it's very similar, South Africa as well. But for women, there's definitely a decline. And a lot of it has to do with spending time on unpaid domestic and care work, but also being unable to be absorbed in the labor market. The study found that young men would typically migrate to urban centers, and they would do all kinds of jobs that are available, quite often physical labor. Whereas for young women, because of social perceptions, they are not allowed to migrate by their families, especially if they live in rural areas. And they are often not willing or able to do the kind of jobs that young men would do when they enter the labor market. But you will see the percentages of NEET in our region is extremely high. It's more than 35% in most countries for women. And once all our labor force surveys find that once young women are not in the labor market, the longer they are out of the labor market, the more impossible it is for them to enter, whether they have a qualification or not. So the study, and there is a reference, you can download the study. I'm not going to give you lots and lots of statistics, but definitely economic context, population growth, poverty, societal norms and attitudes, education provision and employment opportunities all play a role in these high NEET rates in the region. We found a very direct link between early marriage for women as well as age of childbirth and being not in education, employment and training. And you'll see the statistics are quite high in our region. For some countries, Mozambique and Uganda, Malawi and Ethiopia, the percentage of women who are married by the age of 19. That's quite high in those countries. And then by the age of 24, it goes even higher. And then, of course, who had children who are currently pregnant, if you are aged 15 to 19, and you'll see Malawi and Mozambique are particularly high in our region. So the study based on the findings, the quantitative findings, which you can look up, make several recommendations. The first stream of recommendations relates to early marriage and pregnancy, and it's again saying there are laws. Let's try and enforce it, because that's not happening in our region. Women need to have options. Instead of getting married, there should be other choices for them to do. Information and accessible healthcare will make a difference, and of course advocacy and community dialogues. Advocacy plays a role everywhere, whether it's changing ideas about time use and unpaid domestic and care, but also about early marriage and pregnancy. And in the area of education, we recommend more investment in education, particularly that of young women. Content needs to become more appropriate to the labor market needs. We need to retain both young women and men in the school system. Back to school after COVID, let's continue to work on young people, because now the chances are that these figures will be even higher because of the dropout rates during COVID. Second chance initiatives, that's for older young people. Usually, are you able to go back? Pregnant girls who left, can they come back? And then, of course, national level poverty needs to be tackled. Socioeconomic areas, opportunities need to be created for women. Quality employment, this comes back again to the graduate who's selling tomatoes. Labor market policies in general, there's a need for soft skills. And here we're also talking about the kind of management skills, the kind of presentation skills that allow young people to enter the labor market. And then, of course, I'll skip to the last one, productive agricultural inputs and modern farming methods. This links directly to the next presentation. The next presentation will be done by a professor from Canada who was the consultant of UN Women, and who will highlight his findings on the gender gap in agriculture. As you know, in many of our countries, the only economic possibility for women and for many men are to be involved in agriculture. And there's a big gap, a gender gap, between women and men in terms of their agricultural activities. And Professor Haroon will explore that a little bit later. When we look at child labor, we found that if child labor laws are not respected and enforced, they actually compete with the youth for jobs because they are cheaper. And so even addressing that will make a difference for need. So with this, I think I'm finished. And it's time for 2 questions, and then we'll move to Professor Haroon from Canada, who will talk about the gender gap in agriculture. We are really just trying to whet your appetites. This is like in going flash through lots of new and different things. But the idea is, if you're interested in any of these, you can go back and you can look at the publications and read some more about it. Within the context of this workshop, especially now that it's the last session, we don't expect you to engage 100% with this. This is not the right one. We need number 3. Okay. Yes, that's the one. Thank you so much. So, Professor Haroon, thank you for waking up. I don't know how early you normally wake up to share with us the findings of the study, all the way from Canada. You're welcome to continue. I will change the slides, but since I don't know your presentation, please tell me when I have to change.
Okay, are my slides going to be made available on the screen? Yes. Okay, now can you put this into full screen mode, please? Oh no, please go back. Thank you. I will simply say, please go back. I will simply say next slide when I need to go to next slide. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome from a very sunny morning in Canada. And I know everyone is tired after a long day and everyone wants to get to dinner, so I will try and be brief. So, a central question in the effort to reduce rural poverty and improve food security in Africa is the question of women's agricultural productivity. Now, this is an important question for 2 reasons. Firstly, women are disproportionately poor in Africa, particularly in the countryside. Secondly, it is also unmistakably the case that in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, farming is increasingly becoming feminized. By this, what we mean is that an increasing share of the farming population are women, because men are continuing to migrate to towns and cities. And so women's farming is a very important income source for livelihoods and for food security. So what do we mean women's agricultural productivity? It's very straightforward. How much do women farmers produce on each and every plot of land that they operate? Now, at the same time, it should not be assumed that women plot operators have the same agricultural productivity per unit of land as men plot operators. Women and men farmers do not always have the same characteristics. They very often do not face the same production conditions, and they very often do not make the same production choices. And this is what gives rise to the idea of a gender gap in agricultural productivity. That women's agricultural productivity is less than that of men, and if women's productivity could simply be increased to that of men, then agricultural growth, poverty reduction, and improved nutrition would result. So the empirical question across the region is a simple one. Are women farmers less productive than men farmers? And to answer this question, we need data. Next slide, please. Now, as a result of this need, UN Women, the UNDP, UN Environment, Poverty Environment Action, and in conjunction with national governments in 6 countries and the World Bank in 3 countries, have undertaken a number of policy studies to assess whether there is differences in agricultural productivity between men and women plot operators, if there are identifiable gender gaps in agricultural productivity, get an understanding of why there are gender gaps, and where there are gaps, develop policy to eliminate these gaps so as to reduce poverty and improve food security. In 2015, this work was done in Malawi, Tanzania, and Uganda. In 2017, it was done in Ethiopia and Rwanda. In 2018, the work was started in Kenya, but then was put on hold. And the possibilities also of doing this work in South Africa were explored in 2018. In 2021, the work was done for Zimbabwe, and I'm currently involved in doing this work for Mozambique. Now, what makes this policy research different is that the data for it is gender disaggregated. It's not gender statistics by any stretch of the imagination, because the data is associational, it is not relational. But nonetheless, we do have good gender disaggregated data at the plot level. These policy studies use the integrated surveys of agriculture that have been done in each country except Rwanda. Integrated surveys of agriculture are part and parcel of each country's living standards measurement survey, and they produce nationally representative plot level data on assets, inputs, outputs, incomes, and spending. The household surveys that are used as the source of this data and for the policy studies identify whether the principal decision makers for individual plots of land are women or men. So this means that the data that we have is not for male versus female-headed households. We include male versus female-headed households, but on farms which are jointly managed by husbands and wives, which of course are the majority, we identify who makes the most important decisions on specific plots of land on these jointly managed farms. So the data set is far richer, the number of observations is far larger than any work done on gender and agricultural productivity in the 1990s and 2000s. So let me, in the limited time I have left, summarize the results. And the key points to remember is that these results are nationally representative and are not based upon male and female-headed households, but are based upon women and men plot managers. Next slide, please. So, the gender gap in agricultural productivity varies from 11% in Ethiopia to 28% in Malawi. What does this mean? it means that in Malawi, women managers of farmland are 28% less productive than men managers of farmland. In Ethiopia, this is only 11%. In Zimbabwe, it's 19%. So we get measures of how much less productive women plot managers are when compared to men plot managers. We can use the estimate of the gender gap to then model how much of all agricultural production in each country is produced by women and by men. And we can use this estimate in turn to then model how much the gender gap in agricultural productivity results in what we call lost gross domestic product. Lost in the sense that gross domestic product would be higher if women's plots saw their productivity increase to that of men. And what we see then in the second row is that lost gross domestic product varies from $67 million a year in the United States, in Uganda, to $419 million a year in Rwanda. So what this means is that if the gender gap in agricultural productivity in Rwanda is eliminated and women's agricultural productivity was raised to that of men, every year Rwanda's GDP would rise by $400 million. Finally, we can use the estimate of lost GDP to model how much poverty would be reduced if women's plots had their productivity increased simply to that of men's plots. And what we see is that over a 10-year period, poverty would be reduced by about 800,000 people in Tanzania to over 7 million people in Zimbabwe. Which, I mean, think about it, that's a lot of people for Zimbabwe. Over 7 million people stepping out of poverty by simply raising women's productivity to that of men. And all these findings are statistically significant. What this tells us is that gender gap varies across countries, its impact on total production varies across countries, and its impact on poverty varies across countries. But it also tells us that nonetheless, this gender gap is a very important policy objective to eliminate because of the consequences for increased agricultural production, increased GDP, and poverty reduction. So the next question is whether we can, from our data, identify the main statistical causes of this gender gap in agricultural productivity across the 6 countries. And we can do this using a thing called a Oaxaca blinder decomposition technique, which allows us to separate the differences between less productive of land because there is inequality in a range of factor assets and inputs, such as land, such as tools and equipment, and other assets. This is called the endowment effect. But women farmers can also be less productive on their plots of land because they get less in return to their use of these factors of production. Their land generates less, their tools and equipment generate less, their labor generates less. We call this the structural effect. Next table, please. So what we see across the 6 countries is this. For example, in Ethiopia, the most important cause of the gender gap in agricultural productivity is that women use far fewer pesticides than men. This is responsible for 45% of the gender gap, and eliminating this gap would increase GDP in Ethiopia by $92 million a year. In Malawi, the second most important cause of the gender gap in agricultural productivity is that men plant higher value crops. This is responsible for 28% of the gender gap in agricultural productivity, and removing this gap would increase GDP by $28 million a year. And then in Rwanda, the third most important cause of the gender gap in agricultural productivity is that women spend less on insecticides. This is responsible for 13% of the gender gap in agricultural productivity. Eliminating this gap would increase GDP by $54 million a year. Across the 6 countries in this table, there's a huge degree of variation. But these statistically significant findings show that the gender gap in agricultural productivity is primarily a function of three things. First, the availability of male family labor to work on women's plots of land. Secondly, that men produce higher value, more marketable crops. And thirdly, men use better production technologies than women do. From the data then, we can infer that these are important areas for policy reform designed to reduce or eliminate the gender gap in agricultural productivity. And across the 6 countries, we have a number of policy recommendations for reforms to reduce the gender gap. Next slide. The simple takeaway from these policy studies is that the gender gap in agricultural productivity is large. Reducing it can improve poverty and can reduce poverty and improve nutrition. And to reduce this gap, we have to focus on the most costly constraints that women farmers face. We learn that even when men's agricultural productivity is suboptimal, if we can address some of the constraints on women's agricultural productivity, we have the potential to reduce poverty, improve food security, and improve nutrition for women, men, and their families. A true win-win situation. And my final point, which I'm just going to make in reflection to what Oganga has told us already about the time use survey in Kenya, is that in Malawi, Tanzania, and Uganda, these quantitative studies were followed up by qualitative studies, and in all 3 of the countries, the principal source of why women were not available, did not have access to men's labor to work on their plots of land, did not produce higher value, more marketable crops, and didn't have access to better rural technologies was because their unpaid care and domestic work responsibilities. The final slide does provide a link to a number of these policy studies that you can get from the internet. Thank you very much. I hope I was clear.
Great. Thanks a lot, Prof. Arun. Very interesting work. I'm sure there's going to be at least one question. Any takers? Come on. You have one? Thanks.
A bit stupid. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. I have just one question. When you gave the reasons of the gap between men and women, and I haven't seen the report, so I don't know what are the recommendations. So I just say that by total lack of knowledge. But when you say that, for instance, in Ethiopia, the gap comes mainly from a different use of pesticide between women and men, does it mean that the recommendation will be for women to use more pesticide? Or when you say that high crop value are mostly for men and not for women, do you mean that you want to encourage women to have the same type of crop, and meaning less diversity maybe in the agriculture? So it's just a question like that.
Thanks, Mishka. Prof. Arun, we have...
I think I understood most of the question. It was very hard to hear it, but I think I understood it. My understanding of your question is, are the policy recommendations that result specifically focused on women, or are they focused on women and men?
Yeah, that's the point.
What I would do in answering that question is really say that the policy recommendations do reflect specific country circumstances and do reflect extensive consultations with ministries of agriculture, with in some instances district-level officials, and also with civil society organizations. Now, many of these policy recommendations do specifically target women, and that is, if we want to understand why women do not adopt higher value agricultural technologies, it's because they spend so much of their money on supporting their family, and therefore do not have the money to spend on higher, more productive seeds, or herbicides, or fertilizers. They simply don't have the money because they're making sure that their children and their husbands have food on the table, they're paying school fees and things like that. And so then, in those instances, there is a need to think about specific mechanisms to improve women's access two technologies, but these are nationally specific. You cannot generalize across the region. Conversely, however, when we talk about husbands being unwilling to work their wives' plots of land, recommend country. In some cases, there are policy recommendations that are designed to improve the sensitization of men to the benefits that will accrue to them if everyone collaboratively works together to assure a better mutual outcome for the entire household. So very often the policy recommendations are women specific, but there are instances where they are for women and for men.
Thanks, Professor. We have another question in the room.
Ok, merci, bonsoir. Bon, c'est pas vraiment une question, une observation, une réflexion comme ça. Parmi les résultats présentés dans l'étude, il y a un qui est au niveau du Zimbabwe, je crois bien, où la réduction du niveau de pauvreté est assez élevée. Alors, j'ai demandé comme ça juste, est-ce qu'on a pris en compte les conditions d'accessibilité à la terre, la possession des terres? Lorsque on voit un peu, on prend en compte cet aspect, cet écart, ce gap, lorsqu'on veut étudier ce gap dans l'agriculture, est-ce qu'on prend en compte la possession et l'accès à la terre? Parce que dans nos contextes, que le système soit patrilinéaire ou matrilinéaire, en fonction la possession des terres revient, en fonction des systèmes, la possession des terres revient souvent à l'homme. Alors bon, quand on vise à réduire les écarts, bon, j'aimerais bien comprendre à quelle recommandation, quel type de recommandation on va déboucher. On va déboucher, à quel type de recommandation on pourrait déboucher dans ce cas-là. C'est un peu une réflexion comme ça que j'avais. Merci.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Belle, is it possible for you to summarize the question for me?
Alors, en anglais. Okay, I will try. I've seen your result, the result in this study. So I was asking myself, in this study, have you integrated the possession of land, the access of land? Since in our different contexts, the possession of land, of the access of land, is for men, is the men advantage. So have you take this point of view? Have you considered this point of view? Thank you.
I do understand the question now, and the question of women's access to land is one which is extremely important to me, to anyone who knows my policy work and also my scholarly research. The question of women's access to land is mainstreamed across all of the 6 countries that we have done. It may be very surprising that only in the case of Zimbabwe is it seen to be a statistically significant determinant of women's lesser access to land. In the other 5 countries, it is not. Part of the reason behind this, however, is that these studies focus only on small-scale farming. They don't focus on medium-scale farms at all. And what's true about small-scale farming is that both men's and women's plots of land are very small. The second reason, so their holdings are small, but the second reason why it doesn't factor in as much as one might think is because in many of the countries, the largest sets of observations are on farms which are jointly managed by women and by men. So women may not have a formal deed to a piece of land, but neither do the men. They are working together. What we're trying to understand is that when men and women work together on a jointly managed farm, why are women less productive? And that's a different question because they are sharing land rather than necessarily having separate control of everything. So it's surprising that land doesn't come up more often. Part of the reason is because they are very small holdings to begin with, but secondly, in many instances, we're looking at jointly managed farms in which men and women allocate management of plots, but jointly control the entire farm. And in those instances, we're getting very interesting results about what happens when we go beyond land ownership to uncover on jointly managed farms why women are less productive.
Thanks, Professor Arun. I'm very tempted to say you can't ask your question, but we won't have him in the room again, so quickly ask.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Among your explanation of the likely reason why you have this gender gap, there is a low access to men workforce within the household. So I have to, my guess is, my question is that in terms of policy recommendation, what should be the incentives that you give to men to get more involved in a female plot? First. Second, in case that you increase men involvement in women plot, will you be, there is an issue that may happen there. It is the control of the resource now after, because men being involved, you improve the crop, so there is an issue of control of the resource. Will you be heading to another gender conflict within the household? Thank you.
Okay, well again, I didn't quite hear all of the question. I thought the first part of your question was around the fact that we find that husbands by and large are less willing to work on women's plots of land. And I think you were asking about the recommendations to try and deal with that circumstance. And I think the second part of the question was around crop choices. And why women's crop choices and men's crop choices may not be the same. So that's what I think your question was. The question of women's plots and men's willingness to work on women's plots of land is an extremely interesting one. And it's extremely interesting because part of the answer to this question lies in the fact that men and women do have different crop choices. In many places, men are much more likely to produce more marketable cash crops, which can be sold, and women have the responsibility to produce staple crops, which will be used for household food security. Now, men then want to work on their plots of land because they want to be able to retain the earnings from their cash crops, whereas women would like men to work on their plots of land, but they're less willing to do so because they want to work in a way that generates some remuneration, whereas women are producing crops that by and large are not marketed. I think the policy recommendation that comes out of this is that there does need to be measures to break down social norms which result in men being unwilling to recognize that contributing to women's plots will improve their own standard of living. And that's because by improving women's productivity, the household as a whole will A, have more to eat, but B, may be able to increase its marketable crops. And so UN Women in particular, in many countries in the Eastern and Southern African region, are increasingly getting involved in projects which are designed to bring husbands and wives together to collaboratively plan for the future and then start to think about how they can realize their future aspirations. And the purpose behind these sorts of interventions is to demonstrate the benefits of collaborative farming together to achieve joint outcomes rather than working separately. Now, these are very interesting policy interventions, but it has to be said, very often they're very difficult to fund because they're very expensive. You need field workers to go in and sit down with families and discuss their circumstances over a course of a period of time. And moreover, the challenge is the results don't happen immediately. And development practitioners know that checking off a box is very important in doing your evaluation. But sometimes these results can take 5 or 7 or 10 years. So breaking down social norms around why men prefer to work for cash and women are expected to produce food for the home, this is very important, but breaking down social norms, it happens all the time, but it takes more time than a typical development intervention which supplies fertilizer, for example. And this then helps explain the issue of differential crop mixes, the differential responsibilities that women have compared to men within the household. I hope that was the right answer to that question, but as I said, I didn't quite hear it.
Professor, in the interest of time, I think we'll have to move on. There are more questions. I suggest that they write it in the chat.
Sure.
So please go to Madeleine's computer.
Yeah. Oh,
and even your question, the second one which wasn't answered. Thank you, Professor, for doing that. And then we are now handing over to Mbeni. She represents the Senegal Statistical Agency. She's going to share with us the Women's Economic Empowerment Index they developed.
Bonjour tout le monde. Donc, je vais vous présenter un indicateur qui a été développé au Sénégal, appelé Indice d'autonomisation des femmes, qui a été construit dans le cadre du projet d'appui, de suivi, d'évaluation et de mise en œuvre des politiques publiques sensibles aux gens. Donc, ce projet a été implémenté par le Bureau régional de l'Afrique de l'Ouest de l'ONU Femmes et financé par la coopération italienne. Il a pour but d'évaluer un programme appelé Programme d'appui à la stratégie nationale pour l'équité et l'égalité genre. Et les activités de ce projet sont principalement axées sur la contextualisation, l'appropriation de l'indice d'autonomisation des femmes qui a été développé en 2015 au Sénégal. Et l'IAF a pour principal objectif de mesurer le niveau de prise de pouvoir des femmes tout en tenant en compte le contexte du pays. Voilà. Donc, la construction s'est faite en 2 phases. D'abord, il y a eu une phase exploratoire entre 2015 et 2016 où toute la revue scientifique a été faite et l'analyse du contexte national aussi. Et sur cette base, on a construit une matrice du système IAF à travers les dimensions, ses composantes, ses indicateurs ainsi que ses variables. Donc, on a défini 3 sous-matrices. La première, c'est la matrice de facto basée sur les données de fait, les données factuelles, les données empiriques. Et la seconde matrice, c'est la matrice de habitude. Ce sont les données subjectives, disons, basées sur les opinions. Et pour ces 2 sous-matrices, on a les mêmes sources de données. Ce sont les données administratives, les données d'enquête et de recensement. Ensuite, on a la 3e sous-matrice sur les données d'ordre juridique. Et dans cette phase, après avoir défini les variables de chaque sous-matrice, une enquête pilote a été faite et les variables ont été calculées au niveau local. Une région a été choisie, la région de Kaolack, qui est une des régions du Sénégal. Et après cela, On a fait le recalcul des variables, disons qu'on a agrégé au niveau national. La seconde phase, c'était la phase d'appropriation entre 2018 et 2020. On a au total 4 dimensions, la dimension sociale, la dimension culturelle, la dimension politique et droit civil, ainsi que la dimension économique. Et pour chaque dimension, on définit ses composantes. Donc au total, on a 19 composantes. Et pour le niveau indicateur, pour chaque composante, on a ses indicateurs. Ce qui nous fait au total un nombre de 59 indicateurs de la matrice globale du système IAF. Donc les indicateurs sont calculés comme convergents entre les variables, que ce soit les indicateurs, les indices ou les variables. Toutes ces données sont ramenées à une échelle qui varie entre 0 et 1. Donc plus c'est proche de 1, plus c'est favorable à l'autonomisation de la femme. Donc ici, on a les résultats provisoires qu'on avait lors de la phase d'appropriation. Ici, c'est la sous-matrice des données du cadre juridique. C'est la représentation des articles et des lois en lien avec les indicateurs IAF. Donc, la répartition s'est faite en fonction des 4 dimensions et des composantes de la matrice du système IAF. Donc, en bleu, on a les lois qui sont défavorables à l'autonomisation et en vert, les lois qui sont favorables. Et on voit que pour certaines composantes, on n'a même pas de loi en lien avec l'autonomisation définie selon le système IAF. Par exemple, pour les réseaux sociaux, la nutrition et la vie saine. Pour ce qui est de la dimension culturelle, en bas, vous voyez que quelle que soit la composante, il n'y avait aucune loi, en tout cas jusqu'en 2020, en lien avec le système IAF qui était défini. Donc là, c'est aussi les résultats provisoires de la sous-matrice de facto, les données empiriques et les données factuelles. Donc ici, bon, vous avez les résultats provisoires qu'on a calculés, les indices des composantes, des dimensions. Mais ce qu'il faut retenir, c'est que après la fin de l'étude, en tout cas de la phase provisoire, sur 59 indicateurs qui étaient prévus, 44 ont été calculés. Et par conséquent, puisque les variables sont, les indicateurs sont définis à travers les variables, sur 324 variables définies, 204 ont été calculés. Ceci est dû au fait qu'il y avait des données manquantes et des données, surtout les données administratives, mais aussi pour certaines variables, ces questions n'étaient pas encore prises en compte dans les questions, dans les enquêtes faites au niveau de l'INS. Ici, on fait une comparaison des indicateurs. Voilà, on fait une comparaison des indicateurs ODD avec le système IAF. Donc, en fonction des dimensions définies dans le système IAF, on a comparé les indicateurs ODD avec les variables du système IAF. Donc, pour la dimension sociale, on a 20 indicateurs de l'ODD quand même, qui sont pris en compte aussi dans le système IAF. Par ailleurs, on a 17 variables qui sont prises en compte dans le système IAF, mais qui ne sont pas, bon, disons, ils sont dans le système ODD, mais ne sont pas ventilés selon le sexe. Et il en est de même pour les autres dimensions, ce qui nous fait au total 28 variables qui sont dans le système IAF, mais qui ne sont pas ventilées dans le système ODD. Donc, en bas, vous avez les liens des rapports méthodologiques des résultats provisoires qui sont du système IAF. Donc, je vous remercie de votre attention.
Any questions for Mbeni? Thank you so much, Mbeni. Very interesting. 2 questions, yes.
Tableau de score. Pouvez retourner s'il vous plaît sur votre tableau de score. Je vois que la ligne liberté politique, il n'y a pas de score. Ça veut dire quoi?
Ça veut dire que pour cette composante, il n'y a pas, même si les variables ont été définies, si ce sont des données administratives, on n'a pas eu les données. Et si certaines variables de cette composante ne sont pas calculées, c'est parce que aussi ce n'est pas pris en compte au niveau des enquêtes. Donc on a différentes sources de données, les données administratives et les données d'enquête et de recensement. Si une composante n'est pas calculée, un indice d'une composante ou d'un indicateur, en tout cas, c'est parce que les données n'étaient pas disponibles, parce que ce sont les résultats de 2020.
De 2020. Mais si, excusez-moi, si vous avez cet indicateur dans un pays où l'État a mis une loi qui impose la parité et que depuis maintenant 3 législatures, la parité à l'élection, dans toutes les élections d'assemblée est obligatoire et le nombre de femmes élues au niveau local et au niveau central a augmenté pour être paritaire chez les hommes, et vous mettez 0 et là, mais l'information elle existe parce que c'est une donnée administrative qu'on peut collecter. Est-ce que ça ne va pas créer un rejet chez les décideurs politiques de votre classement?
Donc, ce qu'il faut savoir, vous parlez des lois en lien avec la liberté politique, n'est-ce pas? Pour le calcul d'un indice d'une composante, on ne se base pas seulement sur les résultats, parce que c'est 3 niveaux de réalité. Les variables de fait, les variables d'ordre juridique, sûrement sur... parce que je crois ici... c'est quoi? Liberté politique... Voilà, vous voyez qu'ici, on a quand même une loi. Donc, pour le calcul de cet indicateur, de l'indice d'une composante, on se base sur les 3 niveaux de réalité. Les réalités de fait, la réalité aussi d'ordre juridique, la loi dont vous parlez, on n'a pas dit que ça n'existe pas, ça existe. Mais ici, ce que vous avez, ce sont les données empiriques et les données factuelles. Donc, ici, on ne peut pas calculer l'indice dans cette sous-matrice-là. C'est la sous-matrice des données factuelles.
J'ai répondu par rapport à ça, j'ai compris. Il y a la réalité juridique, il y a une loi. Il y a la réalité des faits, il y a eu des assemblées on peut bien voir, on a ces données. Depuis, on voit que les assemblées locales, les assemblées nationales ont changé. Donc, on a la réalité de faits. Vous avez la donnée. C'est ça que je veux dire.
Thank you so much, Mbeni.
Okay.
Bon. Ok. À mon tour, je vais vous présenter maintenant les résultats d'une enquête sur les femmes dans le commerce, principalement dans le commerce frontalier et les femmes dans le commerce, enfin les femmes qui ont leurs entreprises. Cette enquête a été faite dans le cadre de la préparation de... oui. Cette enquête a été faite dans le cadre de la préparation en fait d'un protocole dédié, d'un protocole sur les femmes dans le commerce, dans la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, donc l'African Continental Free Trade Area. Donc, juste une petite définition. Qu'est-ce que c'est que cette African Continental Free Trade Area? C'est un programme de l'Union africaine. C'est un programme phare de l'Union africaine et de l'agenda de 2063 qui vise à former en fait le plus grand marché de libre-échange du monde. Et en fait, l'idée, c'est de créer un marché unique pour les biens et les services qui va concerner à environ 1,3 milliard personnes, c'est-à-dire la population du continent africain. Et qui va permettre d'agrandir, de consolider en fait l'économie, l'intégration économique africaine. Et puis qui va offrir en fait la possibilité d'avoir un jeu de régulation, un cadre de régulation commun à tous les pays qui pour l'instant ont chacun dans leur coin leurs règles de régulation. Bon, donc l'accord sur ce document a été signé par 44 pays. On est donc sur une grosse majorité des pays africains qui ont signé cet accord. La Banque mondiale a fait un rapport en juillet 2022 sur le potentiel en fait de ce marché et il dit que en fait ça a le potentiel de sortir de la pauvreté 30 millions, de sortir de l'extrême pauvreté 30 millions de personnes et d'augmenter les revenus d'environ 68 millions de personnes en Afrique. 68 millions de personnes qui vivent en dessous de 5,5 $ par jour. Plus d'autres potentiels, d'autres gains potentiels. Je vous ai mis le lien sur le rapport qui est assez intéressant que vous pourrez suivre ici. Donc, on a mis en place une enquête pour renseigner, en fait, comme je vous l'ai dit, oui, voilà, c'est ce que je voulais vous dire, c'était le lien, j'arrive jamais à dire l'acronyme, donc je vais parler du trade et le genre. Donc en fait, c'est pour aider aussi à favoriser ces femmes qui font du commerce formel ou informel transfrontalier et d'augmenter le potentiel des femmes entrepreneurs à développer leur business et même à répondre à des demandes de marché public. Donc c'est de leur permettre d'augmenter les chaînes de valeur, de vendre mieux leurs produits, de passer d'un pays à l'autre. Donc il y a un protocole qui va être développé, qui est en développement d'ailleurs, justement, pour les femmes commerçantes. Donc on a fait une enquête. L'objectif de cette enquête, il y avait 3 grands objectifs de cette enquête. C'était d'abord de déterminer quelles étaient les contraintes et les goulots d'étranglement qui entravent la participation des femmes dans le commerce transfrontalier et les entreprises dirigées par les femmes dans le commerce en général. D'identifier les impacts de ce trade sur les femmes dans le commerce transfrontalier et dans aussi les entreprises dirigées par les femmes. Et enfin, d'identifier les mesures d'atténuation à inclure dans ce protocole qui est en cours d'élaboration, protocole sur les femmes dans le commerce. Donc la collecte des données, il y a eu en fait 2 groupes qui ont été concernés par la collecte des données. D'abord les femmes. Le premier groupe, c'était les femmes engagées dans les activités de commerce transfrontalier, qui soient formelles ou informelles, sur les pays africains. Et c'était une enquête qui a été faite en ligne. Okay. L'enquête a été conduite de juillet 2021 à octobre 2021 et les questionnaires ont été traduits en anglais, en français, en arabe et en swahili pour permettre à la majorité de femmes de répondre. L'échantillon n'était pas un échantillon. L'enquête n'est absolument pas représentative, ce n'était pas le but. L'échantillon n'était pas... En fait, on a utilisé une variante de la méthode de la boule de neige en partant en fait des femmes qui étaient dans le commerce et qui étaient identifiées par les organisations qui travaillaient sur cette enquête, c'est-à-dire ONU Femmes, le PNUD et le secrétariat du African Trade Continental. La deuxième enquête qui a été faite un petit peu plus tardivement, elle concernait les femmes qui sont entrepreneurs elles-mêmes. Et ça, en fait, la méthode d'administration de l'enquête, c'était des enquêtes faites en personne pendant l'événement du Intra-Africa Trade Fair. Et c'était aussi donc des enquêtes en ligne, on a donné à ces femmes entrepreneurs le lien pour aller en ligne répondre à ces questionnaires. Et ils ont eu comme ça 141 femmes, je crois, si je me rappelle bien. Et l'enquête a été conduite en novembre et décembre, et ça a été en anglais et en français. Pour la première enquête, ce qui est très intéressant de voir, c'est qu'on a eu un échantillon de femmes de 35 pays africains, donc c'est quand même beaucoup. Mais c'était principalement sur ces 35 pays africains, il y en a presque des 3/4 qui en fait venaient du Nigeria, du Sénégal, du Zimbabwe, du Kenya. Enfin, c'est un certain nombre de pays qui ont représenté la grosse part de l'échantillon. Et parmi des répondantes, et parmi ces répondants, en fait, pratiquement presque la moitié en fait viennent du Nigeria. Donc on a un petit biais par rapport aux femmes dans le commerce transfrontalier par rapport au Nigeria. Alors je vais vous présenter les résultats principaux très vite parce que c'est une petite présentation rapide. D'abord on va regarder un petit peu ce qui s'est passé sur les femmes qui sont actives dans le marché, le commerce transfrontalier. Alors les principales contraintes qu'elles ont rencontrées dans leur business, c'était les principales... attendez, j'arrive pas à les lire. Bon, c'était que vous voyez que les 3/4 des répondantes ont dit qu'une des principales barrières, en fait, à leur business, c'était le manque d'accès au crédit pour pouvoir acheter de plus grandes quantités quand elles font leur commerce, parce qu'elles travaillent avec des petites quantités qui ne leur permettent pas, bien sûr, de faire des plus-values très importantes. La deuxième barrière très importante, obstacle qui a été constaté, donné par toutes ces femmes, c'était que les manques de sécurité, de conditions sécuritaires pour ces femmes commerçantes, notamment avec tout ce qui concerne les problèmes liés à la violence. Et on voit ici qu'il y avait 70% des répondantes qui ont cité ça comme un obstacle, dont 38% comme un obstacle majeur. Les coûts de transport aussi pour presque la moitié des répondantes. Donc vous avez ici les obstacles principaux qui ont été cités par les femmes comme contraintes dans leur business en fait. Et donc une autre part qui a été demandée effectivement, c'était de savoir quelles étaient les contraintes relatives à la violence en fait, par rapport à ces femmes qui font donc du commerce transfrontalier. Et c'est une problématique extrêmement importante parce qu'on sait qu'à toutes les étapes de ce commerce, il y a des risques de violence importantes pour ces femmes qui se retrouvent généralement seules à faire leurs activités. Et on voit que, en fait, un tiers des femmes déclarent avoir, à un moment ou à un autre, et sous n'importe quelle forme, eu des événements de violence et d'agression quand elles ont fait leur passage aux frontières. Dont vous voyez que plus d'un quart, en fait, ça concerne des violences économiques. Elles ont été obligées de soudoyer les agents des douanes pour pouvoir passer leurs biens. Qu'il y en a un quart qui ont fait l'expérience d'humiliation, 10% qui ont expérimenté une violence physique, et on a même 7% qui ont été soumises à des violences sexuelles. Et parmi ces femmes, on a un tiers des femmes qui ont déclaré avoir cherché en fait recours auprès des policiers ou des officiers des douanes pour leur apporter un soutien. Et les 2 tiers de ces femmes ont effectivement reçu le soutien qu'elles avaient demandé. Maintenant, les actions que ces femmes ont déclaré vouloir être mises en place pour les aider à améliorer en fait leurs conditions de travail et leur business et développer leur business. Vous voyez qu'il y a beaucoup la principale raison est celle qui est la réduction des droits douaniers. Et en fait, c'est une des grandes recommandations en fait de ce marché qui serait de réduire effectivement les taxes et les droits de passage. La deuxième information, c'est la deuxième action, c'est que les femmes demandent qu'on leur renforce leur capacité d'avoir accès à la formation et les technologies de communication et le développement du business en ligne. De leur faciliter l'accès aux finances et de leur obtenir des garanties. Donc là encore ici, on a mis ici les principales actions que les femmes voudraient voir entreprendre. Il y a beaucoup d'autres choses, je vous ai présenté que quelques résultats ici, parce qu'il y a énormément d'autres résultats, mais on a présenté ici que les principaux. Enfin, que quelques-uns d'ailleurs, parce que ce n'est pas forcément les principaux. Maintenant, il s'agit des femmes entrepreneurs, qui elles donc ont répondu d'une autre manière, et elles aussi, les obstacles qu'elles ont donnés, c'est en fait qu'à chaque fois on leur demande énormément de documentation pour pouvoir franchir les frontières quand elles veulent entreprendre leur business. C'est un obstacle qui a été reporté par près de la moitié de ces femmes entrepreneurs. L'accès aux finances, au crédit, qui a été cité par un tiers des femmes comme un obstacle majeur au développement de leur business. Et ce qui est aussi intéressant, c'est le manque de connaissance des politiques, des régulations, des procédures, des processus à mettre en place pour faciliter le passage et l'accès à ces marchés, qui est quand même pour près d'un quart des femmes. Et évidemment, les barrières douanières, quoi, tout ce qui concerne les barrières douanières pour près de 40% des femmes. Et maintenant, on a demandé aussi ces femmes qui ont leur propre entreprise, leurs difficultés d'accéder au marché public. Parce qu'on sait très bien que les femmes entrepreneurs ont très très faible accès au marché public. Et donc, on est en train de développer les capacités de ces femmes entrepreneurs pour qu'elles puissent répondre aux appels d'offres. Donc, les raisons principales qui ont été évoquées par les femmes comme les obstacles à leur participation à ces offres de marché public, c'est d'abord les traitements qui sont donnés. En fait, on préfère toujours traiter ces marchés publics avec des contracteurs qui ont déjà une histoire et qui sont déjà bien établis. Par 14% des femmes, et il y a aussi 15% des femmes qui ont relevé les problèmes de corruption pour avoir accès à ces marchés publics, d'être donc obligées de payer et de soudoyer certaines personnes pour pouvoir avoir accès à ces marchés publics. Et en fait, 11% des femmes aussi, pour le troisième obstacle plus important, ont parlé de discrimination vis-à-vis des entreprises féminines, gérées par les femmes, dans lesquelles on n'a pas confiance des capacités dans ces femmes entrepreneurs de gérer les marchés publics. Et finalement, ce qu'elles proposent, les femmes, ce qu'elles proposent d'entreprendre comme action, et tout ça c'est extrêmement important parce que c'est ce qui va figurer dans le protocole, c'est ce qui va pouvoir servir de base et enrichir les propositions de ce protocole des femmes commerçantes, c'est de renforcer et supporter les associations de femmes entrepreneurs, de leur fournir de l'assistance technique et des moyens de financement pour la production de leurs biens et de leurs services, avec les standards en vigueur. Donc c'est d'améliorer aussi la qualité de leur production. Finalement, de fournir un appui technique pour identifier et tenir compte des avantages que va offrir ce nouveau marché. Parce que les femmes ont besoin de formation pour savoir ce que ce nouveau marché va pouvoir leur offrir comme opportunité, pour qu'elles puissent bénéficier le plus possible de ce que ces nouvelles mesures vont permettre de faire. Donc vous avez ici les différentes actions proposées par les femmes elles-mêmes. Les résultats de cette enquête en ligne vont être publiés dans un rapport conjoint, donc UNDP, ONU Femmes et AFCTA, qui va s'appeler The Heartbeat of Trade in Africa. Et ce document va être publié le mois prochain, avec tous les résultats de l'enquête, en conjonction avec la conférence des femmes dans le commerce, qui est planifiée pour du 12 au 14 septembre en Tanzanie. Voilà. Et ce qui est intéressant de voir, et peut-être pour vous tous ici, c'est que les bases de données vont être mises aussi à disposition, donc des analyses complémentaires pourront être faites. Et ça, c'est une première étude qui va servir aussi de base pour entreprendre peut-être des études plus complexes et mieux structurées sur le problème de ces femmes dans les commerces transfrontaliers. Voilà. Voilà, si vous avez besoin d'informations supplémentaires, surtout ne venez pas vers moi. Vous avez toutes ces personnes ici qui pourront vous informer sur cette enquête et sur le rapport qui va sortir, d'ailleurs, qui va être mis à la disposition de tout le monde au mois de septembre. Voilà.
Merci. Le rapport est très enrichissant et beaucoup d'informations. Je voulais comme ça partager à chaud quelques observations que j'ai faites qui peuvent... Alors, dans le... Je m'interrogeais comme ça là. Dans la ZLECAF, on connaît bien, c'est un projet, c'est un grand projet mis en œuvre par la Banque africaine de développement. Alors, dans le souci dans l'idée, c'est pas le souci, dans l'idée de valoriser les statistiques, les données, surtout en ce qui concerne les données sur le genre, n'est-ce pas? L'étude a été menée, incluant la Banque mondiale, UNDP, ONU Femmes.
Pas la Banque mondiale. UNDP, ONU Femmes et le ZLECAF, le secrétariat du ZLECAF.
Voilà, merci. Alors, pourquoi n'avoir pas associé pour une meilleure appropriation des données par les pays, par les institutions des pays, pourquoi n'avoir pas associé les instituts nationaux de statistiques? Parce que quand on sait que actuellement les pays africains sont engagés dans un programme d'amélioration des systèmes d'état civil, des systèmes de données, des systèmes de collecte de données, pourquoi n'avoir pas associé les instituts nationaux pour une meilleure, pour d'abord déjà, parce que les recommandations qui sortent là, elles peuvent mieux aider à préparer les plans d'action, une reconnaissance même déjà d'abord de ces projets-là, de ces problèmes-là, à préparer les politiques ou les plans d'action en faveur de la prise en compte, l'intégration du genre, n'est-ce pas? Et aussi pour valoriser même, parce que lorsqu'on nous dit 15%, on dit qu'il y a une discrimination envers ceci. Bon, ce 15%, je crois que si il avait été, les instituts avaient été pris en compte dans la formulation, ou ne serait-ce avait été intégrés dans l'étude, les résultats seraient reconnus au niveau national et les données vraiment, ça ce sont les données qui parlent. Mais maintenant, lorsqu'on va formuler des politiques, c'est peut-être ça aussi, à mon avis, hein, je ne veux pas, ça c'est ma petite observation, c'est peut-être ça aussi, lorsqu'on va formuler à l'issue de l'étude, lorsqu'on va formuler, vous dites que le rapport sera présenté le mois prochain. Lorsque vous allez formuler des recommandations à l'endroit des autorités, ils n'ont pas pris part. Ils ne savent pas sur quel... C'est un peu ça.
C'est pas à l'encontre des autorités, c'est maintenant pour la ZLECAF. Qu'est-ce que la ZLECAF va mettre en œuvre pour faciliter? Quels sont les États ont ratifié et sont membres donc sont d'accord en fait. Et maintenant, il faut proposer des solutions pour celui-là particulièrement pour faciliter l'accès des femmes. C'est vraiment très 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 spécifique sur les femmes commerçantes dans les petits commerces formels et informels et qui traversent les frontières en fait. Donc c'est quelque chose de très très spécifique. C'est pas une grande étude qui va impliquer. Vous avez vu le protocole, c'est pas quelque chose de très scientifique. C'est pas une étude qui va être renouvelée sous cette forme-là. C'était vraiment pour donner quelques directives avec une méthode d'identification des participantes qui est quand même la méthode de la boule de neige, qui est quand même très spéciale, et où la première femme qui a été identifiée dans chaque pays venait d'une femme qui faisait partie des groupes, par exemple, encadrés par ONU Femmes, encadrés par UNDP, des femmes entrepreneurs ou des femmes commerçantes. Donc le rôle des NSO dans cette enquête-là n'avait pas vraiment de raison d'être. Je ne dis pas que les prochaines enquêtes qui devrait être quand même plus structuré et permettre de mesurer en fait le progrès l'avancée en fait de ces femmes commerçantes et de leur possibilité d'étendre leur marché ne va pas être faite de manière plus structurée avec les instituts de statistique. Voilà.
Thank you very much. Now we are moving to the last presentation, and you've learned from Solly earlier today about some of the work done by Statistics South Africa. We've learned more about the Senegalese Women's Economic Empowerment Index. And in our region here in Eastern Southern Africa, Kenya, National Bureau of Statistics have made giant leaps forward in the last 5 years in the area of gender statistics. And I think it would be interesting for you to just learn a little bit more about what they've done to advance gender statistics in their country. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you so much, Isabella. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
Have my video off kindly. So I'm Carol, as you see, from KNBS, gender statistician, as well as a demographer by profession. So mine is going to be a brief one, because I want to imagine you're all tired. I mean, it's already past 6, almost 7 p.m. So hey, everyone. So I'll start by quickly just mentioning what KNBS does. And KNBS is basically just the National Statistical Office in Kenya. That is just basically a principal agency for the government on matters regarding production and dissemination of official statistics. So the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics was established by the Statistics Act of 2006, which was amended in 2019 to give provisions in terms of Kenya population and housing census surveys. So core mandate, as you can see from the screen, is essentially just to collect, compile, analyze, as well as also disseminate official statistics. And in line, or an additional role as well, is just to assist in coordinating, monitoring, and as well as the supervision of national statistical system. So on my next slides, I'll be speaking into what we've done as an NSO in terms of gender statistics. But I want to mention that the majority of these activities are made possible through the Women Con program that is run by UN Women, which we are actually part of. So, and the first slide, or what you can see on the slide, is basically in terms of having an enabling environment that is in line with the legal framework, as well as the coordination mechanism, also in terms of finances. So for the program to be able to be implemented well, so there was an assessment that was done in 2018, more or less like situation analysis in terms of gender statistics in the country. So this formed the basis of what the program activities were supposed to be, more or less like a building block for the activities to be able to be categorized into the 3 thematic areas. So another product that is key in the gender statistics sector is what we call the GSSP, or rather the Gender Statistics Sector Plan. So the GSSP is part of the Kenya Strategy for Development of Statistics. A KSDS for us is just a framework that is good in terms of statistical planning. So the Gender Statistics Sector Plan, our core purpose is just to enable strengthening the statistical capacity in the country in terms of production and use across the entire national statistical system. So this is available in our website, and it's such a good tool for us as an NSO to be able to coordinate what happens in the gender sector. Thirdly, we are also in the process of developing or finalizing on the regulations for implementation of the Statistics Act 2006. So reason for this is because the act itself is a little bit gender blind. So to try and mitigate that issue, so we developed regulations that are to be able to ensure that implementation of the act has a gender perspective. So in the regulations, what gender statistics is, how it's supposed to be produced, it's well spelled out. So we are in the final processes or final stages of completing the regulations. Another achievement is what we call the CGD guidelines. So these are the citizen-generated data guidelines that are appended in the KESCAF, that is the Kenya Statistical Quality Assurance Framework. So the KESCAF is supposed to ensure that all data that is produced in the national statistical system is quality. So, but to be able to take care of the CSOs, that is the civil society organization, so the CGD guidelines were developed. So what the guidelines do is they're able to alert or they're able to guide the CSOs on how they're going to produce their statistics that are actually going to be of quality in nature in attempts to be able to fill in the data gaps that are existing. So for gender statistics, to be precise, like a few weeks ago, we were at a workshop trying to pilot how to be able to use the criteria, the matrix for scoring the CGD paper. We were able to amend it and try to improve on it with a key focus on gender gaps. Then in line with a gender responsive budget, again, KNBS with other partners are in the process of updating the Standard Chartered of Accounts. So this is supposed to help us to be able to track what allocations are made, what expenditures are made in line with gender activities. So the score, updating of the score through the Treasury, this is done with UNICEF as well as with women. So it's also an activity that's ongoing. And you're also going to be able to properly respond to the SDG indicator 5.C.1 that checks on whether countries have a system that are able to respond to gender responsive budgeting on what goes to gender issues. And then lastly on the slide, we have what we call the Interagency Gender Statistical Committee. So this is a committee that is meant to oversee implementation of the Women Come program. In addition to this, we also have the Gender Statistics Technical Working Committee. So these two committees, the composition of the committees involve both state and non-state actors. More or less, any committee that you have, bureau or any government institution, they tend to really not have a lot of participation from the non-state actors, but at least we have tried for the Interagency Technical Committee as well as the Gender Statistical Committee, where you have members from the non-state actors, namely groups and SDGs Kenya Forum, and you're looking forward into having more. So my next slide is majorly on the products or the surveys that are ongoing. I cannot initially just mention the timely survey. So data collection for timely survey ended, and currently are in the process of finalizing the preliminary report. And this is going to assist us in measuring the indicator 5.41, as well as the focus on unpaid work on other areas as well, So we also have the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey. So one of the surveys has a lot of indicators from a gender perspective. So the last one was done in 2014, and we just completed data collection for the 2022 one. And the gender statistics section was more or less mandated or oversaw key modules, which included GBV, the gender-based violence module, as well as the FGM, a stroke cutting module. There's also a module on husbands' background and women's work. So the involvement of the gender statistics section was through the design for the tools, training, as well as the data collection. So that is a key achievement for us, and we'll be able to be reporting our indicators with updated data. So thirdly, there's what we call the Women Economic Empowerment module on the Kenya Continuous Household Survey that is currently ongoing. So this is done through the Women Economic Empowerment Hub through the Kenyatta University, as well as the EMAG. So this is just collaboration able to assist in sharing empowerment issues from a woman's perspective. So it's a module appended to that survey, and data collection is ongoing. So we're waiting to see how this one will span out. and see whether we can be able to expound on the module on the upcoming Kenya Integrated Household Budgetary Survey for the next year or so. So another achievement is in line with the processing on and analyzing of existing data sets from the KNBS. So as we all know, a lot of data sets that we produce, they are very rich, but analysis is not really comprehensively done. So, you know, there's this data that is there, but, you know, more needs to be done to give us more reports. So, key of them is a 2015-16 Kenya Integrated Household Budgetary Survey. So this was done to develop a comprehensive poverty report that was launched in 2020, yes. So the report is also done at the county level, a very comprehensive one in terms of modern poverty as well as monetary poverty, the multidimensional deprivation versus the monetary poverty analysis. Also done by different disaggregation for the women, for the elderly, for the youth, etc. And then, as I mentioned again, at the county level, the 47 counties. So it's a very good report if anyone wants to just have a look at it. So another data set that was utilized was 2014 DHS. This key for us to develop a Women Empowerment Index, which was done in 2020. And this was the first time we did this, and we hope once we are done with the DHS for this particular year, we are going to actually come up with another publication for that. Again, on the KIPS dataset for 15-16, reprocessing also done to be able to respond to indicator 5.B.1, sorry, on mobile ownership, and this is also this was also done and published and available on our website. The publication is also available on our website. And then lastly, on what was able to be reprocessed, again, through the Women Count program. So the program supported University of Nairobi students who were master's students graduating in the year 2018 from 4 key selected departments to be able to use data sets from KNBS on whatever they were researching. So they were given different thematic areas that are touching on gender for them to do their research on. And this was actually done in 2018. Next slide, please. So other achievement in terms of products, we have the chapter 18 on the economic survey. So the gender studies section is responsible for production of that chapter. So the economic survey is an annual publication that the KNBS actually produces that gives the economic situation of the country. So chapter 18 gives an indication of economic, political, and social inclusion, but from an economic perspective. So the chapter, I think, is idea to do it. So we are still trying to build on it, trying to get more data. But for the economic survey, we get data from the administrative sources. So we do not collect data afresh for this, but the sources from the admin areas. Namely, again, is the women. Another product is the Women and Booklet in Kenya that gives a snapshot of the situation in the country in a sort of a very small booklet, but only at the national and maybe rural and urban, if possible, or where possible, on selected key indicators. So we are again in the process of producing the second one this year through assistance from Statistics Sweden. They are the ones who solely or majorly just support that publication. And then we have the county-specific gender data sheets that were done in 2020, if I'm not wrong. There were only 10. And then this one has created demand for other counties as well to be able to produce their own specific gender data sheets. So this is just sheets that have information on selected key indicators at the county level. So we are trying to see whether we're going to be able to, consolidate funds and synergies to be able to have all the 47 counties have these data sheets that are going to actually inform the county integrated development plans from a gender perspective. And then we have what you call the national gender data sheet at a national level, some indicators again at the county level, but very minimal and very few. So the difference between the national gender data sheet and the women and men booklet in Kenya is that the national sheet has fewer indicators, but that goes to the county level, you know, but the booklet has more indicators that don't go to the county level. Then this, we've also done the gender rapid assessment, impacts on COVID-19. These were done in 2020 through the UN Women Camp program. And this came about majorly from realizing that what we had as an NSO, you know, we had done some social impact or assessment on the impact of the COVID-19. 2 waves, but the assessment done by the KNBS was not really comprehensive in terms of gender issues. So the rapid gender assessment, which was spearheaded by UN, was very core in terms of different areas on the impacts of the pandemic from a gender perspective. And then lastly, the SDGs Gender Information Data Sheet for Gender-Related Indicators. This is the first time we did this as well, available in our website also. So this is just a compilation of the SDGs Gender-Related Indicators, by just picking a few key indicators and just having them in an infographic manner. So that's also available. And this year, I think like 2 months ago, we were updating the national SDGs indicator framework. We hope after it goes through the processes of just validation and etc., you know, from the senior management and the rest of the stakeholders, we shall be able to update the sheet to a new sheet. So of all these products that I've mentioned, they can be accessed in our website, knbs.or.ke, and then as well as our website has a data sharing platform that you can be able to download any data set that you want to really use. And even whatever you're interested in is not there, it's just a formal request to be able to access the data. So lastly is in terms of collaborations, what do we have? We currently, I think I mentioned the UN Women Camp program, phase 2 ongoing. UNICEF as well supports majority of our program together with UN Women, then World Bank as well. The support is on the KCHS. We have the studies in Sweden, phase 2 again, and they support majorly the booklet, Data to X, ODW, AFDB, Paris 21. Lots of this is technical support, as well as also financial support through other activities. Research through academic institutions, I mentioned KU earlier. We are also partnering with the University of Nairobi on issues to do with women economic empowerment, SDGs Kenya Forum, GROOTS, these are non-state actors. And then the last 2 is of the last technical working committees. I think I am done. I hope I've not really taken a lot of your time. Yes. So I'd like any questions?
Thanks, Caroline. Let's appreciate her. This is our last presentation of the day. I think you probably noticed from what she shared is that they focused a lot on bridging the data gaps for the SDGs. Most of the products that they've developed that are new in the last 3 or 4 years are really aimed at answering SDG reporting requirements. And some of it is also, of course, to meet the own needs of government in Kenya and their own indicator framework. But let's open the floor for questions before we close the session. Anybody has questions for Caroline? Caroline, we will distribute the presentations as well, and I think your pointer to the website is very important. We had a question, I would like to do research, where can I get gender data? Now, my counsel to all of you would be to go to your nearest National Statistical Office. You are likely to find data sets there that have not yet been mined for their potential to produce insights into gender. and the differences between women and men. Especially the agricultural data sets can really yield very interesting information. So my challenge to all of you is try to not use these international data sets, but go to your income and expenditure, your poverty, your continuous household surveys, and see whether there are thematic areas that you can mine as research topics to add value to the gender agenda. And this afternoon's session was really to just create some interest, show you what can be done, what is being done. And we hope in 1 year's time we'll see lots of academic publications.
Yes, thank you, Isabella. Thank you for having proposed this panel, which I think is, we look tired, I guess we are, but it was also very interesting, and the variety of all that you have shown us here, as you said, will bring, I'm sure, more collaboration between you, our NCOs, and I think we're getting there. That was the purpose of this workshop, and I just feel that we're getting there. So, merci tout le monde, et je pense que cette journée a été très très bien remplie. En termes de réflexion, on a eu tellement de choses. Voilà, on a une autre journée demain, j'espère qu'il sera aussi intéressante et passionnante. Et donc, vous pouvez aller vous reposer et on se rejoint demain. Encore merci. Je vais juste, let me remind to our, what's your role again? Anthony. Do you remember? You and...
I'm looking for an exciting title.
Yeah.
Rapporteur.
Rapporteur. Okay. So I'm asking our rapporteurs. Yes, please. So you will be the one starting tomorrow morning. Thank you again, and see you tomorrow. Oh, yeah.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Enjoy your evening. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.
So you better be here in time.
Okay. Okay. But which time?